There's something deeply tragic about watching someone push away the very person who cared most about them. It's not because they didn't see the love, it's because love to them feels dangerous. Avoidants aren't heartless, they're scared. They've built walls not out of arrogance, but out of fear that intimacy might mean losing control, fear that closeness might uncover parts of themselves they're not ready to face. So they push away, convincing themselves it's safer to be alone than to risk being seen. But here's the part no one talks about when they finally succeed in pushing that person away. The silence doesn't bring peace, it brings a haunting. The absence becomes louder than any argument. The one who once reached out stops reaching, and for the avoidant, that stillness feels like a void they didn't expect. They replay moments, every message ignored, every tender moment they dismissed. Every time someone said, "I'm here for you," and they couldn't say, "I need you too." Avoidants often believe detachment is strength, but real strength isn't in walking away from love. It's in allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to stay. And when the one who cared finally stops trying, the avoidant realizes something painful. No amount of independence fills the space that genuine connection once did. They start to miss the consistency, the warmth, the effort they used to take for granted, and yet pride keeps them from reaching out. They'll check your social media, think about texting, then put the phone down. They'll tell themselves they're better off this way, but inside, they're battling regret. Not because they suddenly want attention, but because they finally understand what that attention meant. It was safety, it was love, and love to an avoidant is both the cure and the curse. The journey for an avoidant after loss isn't just about missing a person, it's about confronting their own emotional patterns. They start to see that pushing away isn't protecting them, it's isolating them. Healing begins only when they stop blaming others for needing too much and start admitting they were too afraid to give enough. If you've ever been the one who cared, understand this. Your love wasn't wasted. You showed someone what real intimacy looks like. And even if they couldn't meet you there, you planted a seed. One day, that avoidant might finally be ready to face themselves. And when they do, your memory will remind them what it feels like to be truly seen. Avoidants often walk through life wearing the armor of independence. Believing that self-sufficiency is the ultimate form of strength, they convince themselves that needing someone is weakness, that depending on another person makes them vulnerable to pain. But beneath that armor lies a very different truth: fear. The fear of being hurt, rejected, or abandoned runs so deep that they've learned to mistake detachment for control. It's not that they don't want love, it's that love, in its raw and honest form, feels too unpredictable, too exposing. To the avoidant, closeness triggers alarm bells that say, "You're losing yourself," when in reality they're simply being seen. From the outside, they seem confident and self-contained. They might say things like, "I'm fine on my own," or "I don't need anyone to complete me." And on the surface, it sounds admirable. But what's often missed is that this independence is built on survival, not peace. Somewhere in their past, they learned that relying on others meant disappointment. They might have experienced inconsistency, emotional neglect, or rejection when they were most in need. So they built walls to keep pain out, but those same walls now keep love out too. It's a form of emotional self-protection that eventually becomes self-sabotage. When someone tries to get close to an avoidant, they feel torn. Part of them longs for the warmth, the connection, the safety of being loved. But another part resists it, fearing that love will demand too much. They start pulling back, making excuses, keeping conversations shallow, or distracting themselves with work or hobbies. To them, distance feels like safety. Yet the irony is that the very thing they crave, true emotional intimacy, is what they're running from. The fear whispers that closeness equals loss of freedom, but in truth, avoiding love only leads to loneliness disguised as independence. This fear-driven independence can be exhausting. It requires constant control over emotions, over interactions, over vulnerability. Avoidants often suppress their feelings until they numb themselves completely. But numbness isn't peace, it's a quiet ache that grows over time. They may look calm on the surface, but beneath that composure lies a deep sense of emptiness. And when they finally lose the person who cared, that emptiness becomes undeniable. Because love, no matter how frightening it seems, leaves a mark. It awakens something inside them that can't easily be silenced again. The tragedy is that avoidants are often unaware of how their behavior affects others. They think they're protecting themselves, not realizing they're wounding the person who simply wanted to love them. Every time they pull away, they reinforce their belief that people can't be trusted, not seeing that it's their own fear creating the cycle. What they call independence is really isolation dressed up as confidence. And while it may feel safe, it also keeps them from experiencing the depth and beauty of real connection. Until they confront the fear that drives their distance, they'll continue mistaking emotional survival for emotional strength, pushing away the very closeness that could have healed them. When avoidants finally create the distance they crave, they often expect a sense of relief to follow. They believe that once they've pushed away the person who cared, they'll feel free again, free from pressure, expectations, and emotional vulnerability. But instead of peace, what greets them is silence, and that silence becomes unbearable. The quiet moments, once filled with messages, laughter, and affection, now echo with absence. They find themselves scrolling through old conversations, replaying memories they once brushed off, and realizing that the space they created isn't freedom, it's emptiness. The stillness they sought begins to feel heavy, like the walls they built are closing in around them. At first, they try to distract themselves. They bury their thoughts in work, social media, or fleeting connections that never go deep enough to stir anything real. For a while, it works. They convince themselves they've made the right choice. But late at night, when the world is quiet, that's when the truth starts to whisper. They begin to feel the weight of what they lost. Not just a person, but the emotional safety that person brought into their life. The one who cared offered warmth and patience, and even though the avoidant couldn't handle it at the time, they start to realize that love like that isn't easy to find again. The silence after distance becomes a mirror. It reflects back the moments they ignored, the kind words they dismissed, the affection they deflected, the vulnerability they couldn't reciprocate. Every act of love they once labeled as too much now becomes a memory they can't escape. They begin to miss the consistency of the person who showed up for them, the way they were seen without having to explain themselves. And it's that realization that someone truly cared despite their walls that begins to haunt them the most. They wanted control, but they never expected that control would come with such a profound sense of loss. The person who cared eventually stops trying. They grow tired of reaching out to someone who keeps retreating. And when that happens, the avoidant silence is met with silence in return. That moment is pivotal because it's when avoidance starts to turn into regret. They may not admit it aloud, but they feel it deeply. The text they don't send, the apology they rehearse but never speak, the profile they check just to see if that person has moved on. All of it points to an inner conflict they can't ignore. The independence they fought so hard to maintain suddenly feels hollow. In that emptiness, a lesson begins to surface. The avoidant starts to understand that distance doesn't erase emotional bonds. It only numbs them temporarily. They realize that by pushing someone away, they weren't protecting themselves from pain, they were delaying it. The pain of loss, the ache of missed chances, and the guilt of unspoken words all arrive eventually, disguised as sleepless nights and lingering thoughts. The silence they once desired becomes the loudest thing in their world, reminding them that love, once lost, echoes far longer than they ever imagined. When an avoidant begins to realize what they've lost, regret quietly starts to seep in. But it rarely comes with an apology. Instead, it hides behind a wall of pride. They'll replay moments in their mind, wondering if they went too far, if maybe they should have said something different, or if it's already too late. Yet even as the H of regret grows, their pride whispers, don't reach out. They convince themselves that staying silent keeps their dignity intact, that vulnerability now would make them look weak. But deep down, they know the truth. What they're protecting isn't pride, it's pain. Admitting regret would mean admitting they cared, and for someone who's spent so long trying not to, that feels unbearable. This pride becomes a kind of prison. It keeps them from reaching for closure, from explaining, from healing. They'll hover over the message box, typing out a simple, "How have you been?" only to delete it seconds later. They'll check your social media, hoping to catch a glimpse of your life without them, and every smile or post feels like a reminder that you've learned to live without their absence. That realization stings, but instead of humbling them, it often makes them double down. They tell themselves that you've moved on too easily, that maybe you never cared as deeply as they thought. It's easier to distort the story than to face the truth that they drove away someone who genuinely loved them. In quiet moments, when no one's watching, the cracks start to show. The regret isn't always about losing a relationship. It's about losing the chance to be seen for who they truly are. They start to remember the patience you had, the way you listened when they couldn't find the words, the way you stayed even when they pushed you away. Those memories start to surface like ghosts they can't outrun. Regret doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lingers as a whisper, reminding them of what it felt like to be cared for and accepted without conditions. And that realization cuts deeper than any breakup could. Pride for avoidance is their last line of defense. It shields them from feeling exposed. It allows them to maintain the illusion of control in a situation where their emotions are anything but controlled. But what they don't realize is that pride doesn't heal. It hardens. It keeps them stuck in cycles of silence, replaying the same fears that caused them to lose someone in the first place. They tell themselves that reaching out wouldn't make a difference, yet the truth is it's not the outcome they fear, it's the vulnerability required to even try. Over time, that pride starts to feel heavy. The strength they thought it gave them turns into isolation. They begin to see that regret doesn't fade when ignored. It grows in the dark spaces left by unspoken words. And the cruelest part is that avoidants rarely get closure, not because they weren't given the chance, but because they couldn't step beyond their pride to take it. Deep inside, they ache for redemption, for one more chance to say, "I'm sorry," or "I miss you." But until they learn that pride cannot protect the heart, only imprison it, they remain trapped between what they feel and what they're too afraid to admit. Love, to an avoidant, often feels like a battlefield where they're constantly trying to defend their independence. They've spent years believing that needing someone is dangerous, that letting another person in will somehow take away their power or control. But what they fail to realize is that love was never the enemy. Fear was. Fear of being seen, fear of being hurt, fear of repeating past wounds disguised as, "I'm just not ready for a relationship." This fear becomes so ingrained that it distorts their perception of love itself. They start to equate vulnerability with danger, when in truth, it's the gateway to connection. And while they run from love, it's fear that keeps chasing them. Avoidants are often deeply self-aware. They can analyze their emotions, spot their triggers, and even recognize when they're pulling away. But awareness without courage leads to paralysis. They see the fear but continue to obey it. Love demands surrender. It asks that you lower your guard, even when you don't know if the other person will catch you. For an avoidant, that surrender feels like losing control, and losing control feels like losing safety. But love doesn't want to take away your safety, it wants to share it. The problem is, fear convinces them that opening up will destroy them, when in reality, it's the very act that could save them. The tragedy of avoidance is that they crave what they fear. They long for closeness, for warmth, for someone to understand them without judgment. Yet they sabotage it every time it comes near. Fear whispers, "Don't get too close, you'll get hurt." And they listen, not realizing that it's the distance itself that causes the most pain. They think they're protecting themselves from heartbreak, but what they're really doing is guaranteeing it. Because love, when rejected out of fear, doesn't disappear, it lingers in the form of regret, loneliness, and longing that never quite goes away. Healing for an avoidant begins when they stop fighting love and start facing fear. It means understanding that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's proof of courage. To love openly after being hurt requires far more strength than shutting people out ever could. It means letting go of the illusion of control and realizing that emotional safety doesn't come from walls, it comes from honesty. The more they deny love in the name of fear, the further they drift from the very connection they were born to experience. In moments of clarity, avoidants begin to see that love never asked them to give up their freedom. It only asked them to share it. True strength isn't in building walls high enough to keep everyone out. It's in learning to trust that the right person will handle your heart with care. When they finally allow themselves to lean into love instead of away from it, they discover that fear loses its power. Because love, when embraced without defense, doesn't break you, it rebuilds you. It teaches that the real enemy was never love itself, but the fear that convinced you to run from it. When someone loves an avoidant, it often feels like pouring warmth into a vessel that keeps leaking. They give affection, reassurance, patience, and understanding, yet it seems to never be enough. The avoidant, caught in their fear of intimacy, often mistakes that love for pressure or intrusion. They don't realize in the moment that the person who cares for them is not trying to control them, they're trying to connect. Only later, when that love is gone, does the avoidant begin to see what that person truly was, not a demand, but a mirror. That person reflected back what the avoidant had been too afraid to face: their longing for connection, their hidden tenderness, their capacity to be loved and to love in return. The one who cared wasn't a mistake in the avoidant's story, they were the lesson. They showed the avoidant what real intimacy feels like. Steady, patient, imperfect, but genuine. In the chaos of pushing and pulling, the avoidant got a glimpse of something rare: unconditional acceptance. That kind of love doesn't just vanish, it leaves an imprint. Even after the relationship ends, the avoidant carries that memory as a quiet reminder of what they lost. It becomes a standard that future connections will be compared to, often subconsciously. They may not admit it, but that person becomes the measure of what real connection should feel like. At first, avoidants may dismiss the loss, convincing themselves that the separation was necessary, that the person who cared was too emotional or too intense. But over time, that narrative weakens. The distance gives them perspective. They start to realize that the one who cared didn't want to change them. They simply wanted to love them. And that's when the lesson begins to unfold. They start to see how they resisted love, how their defenses turned something beautiful into something strained. The lesson isn't about regret alone, it's about awakening. The avoidant begins to understand that real connection isn't about control or perfection, it's about allowing yourself to be seen, flaws and all. The one who cared serves as both a reminder and a teacher. Their love may not have lasted, but its impact endures. It challenges the avoidant to reflect on why they push people away, why closeness feels suffocating, and why vulnerability feels like a threat. This reflection becomes the first step toward healing. In recognizing the value of what they lost, avoidants begin to see that love doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be grounding, nurturing, and safe. The person who cared becomes a silent guide in their growth journey, even in their absence. One day, when the avoidant is ready, truly ready, they may find themselves in another relationship. This time, something feels different. They remember the patience once shown to them, and instead of running, they choose to stay. They listen more, open up more, and understand that love isn't a trap, but a choice. The memory of the one who cared becomes the foundation for this change. They taught the avoidant that love isn't something to fear, it's something to honor. And in that realization, the avoidant finally learns that the one they once pushed away was never just a chapter in their story. They were the lesson that taught them how to love again. In the end, the journey of an avoidant is not one of coldness, but of courage. Courage to face the fears that once made love feel unsafe, and to rediscover the strength that lies in vulnerability. It's a reminder that no heart is beyond healing, and no distance is too great for growth. To those who have loved an avoidant, your compassion was never in vain. You became the light that guided someone back to themselves. And to everyone listening, may you never mistake fear for strength, nor distance for peace. Because true freedom is found not in running from love, but in learning how to stay. Thank you for listening, for understanding, and for believing in the power of healing through connection.